in today's video, I'm making some really beautiful pillows out of a fantastic fabric that has a blue and pink floral pattern that I'm trying to get the best composition when I'm measuring out the front of the pillow and getting the pattern placed right where I think it's going to be prettiest. So I'm measuring very carefully many times and kind of blocking out the part of the fabric that I want to center. I've chosen one of the flowers and kind of blocked it out with the rulers to see if I like it right in the middle or if I want to float it a little higher. And then by blocking it out with the rulers, it kind of helps me see what it's going to look like. And then a lot of times I'll walk around to the other side of the table or look at from the side view just to make sure from all angles I like where I've placed that pattern. So that's why I have all the rulers surrounding the flower. And then I'm measuring and double measuring and triple measuring and then drawing the lines, and then I can cut out the pillow. And this is a linen fabric that it's a nice weight, but I'm going to go ahead and add some interfacing on it anyway, just to further add a layer of luxury to the pillow. The interfacing really makes the linen fabric look more fantastic than it already is. So I can't help but adding that interfacing. And then these are going to get velvet welt in the pink. So I'm going to make a little sample just to show you how I like to cut welt, especially velvet welt. And we're going to cut it on the bias. And I'm going to show you a few tricks about that. And so I'm going to use some scraps of this pretty fabric and make some really small pillows just to demonstrate how the welt is going to be attached and then how I'm going to join the ends with a very special technique that I think you'll love, the finished product and how to join the ends of the velvet welt. So I hope you enjoy this video and eventually see other welt tips and tricks and techniques that I like to use when I'm making pillows with welt. We've been working on many pillows lately all of a sudden, and so it's kind of fun to share some of these different ways of making pillows and different ways of making welt. So I hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching. So I'm just going to serge around the edges of this pillow. Super easy. Makes a nice finished edge on the inside of the pillow. And it keeps the fabric from fraying and making a mess as you're working with it. And normally I would serge my welt also, but I did not in this case because of how I'm going to join the ends. And so I'll explain that when I get to that step. So when I'm ready to cut my welt, especially out of a velvet, I want to cut it on the bias. So if I were to just cut it this way, and here's the selvage. If I cut it off of the bottom straight, it's not very stretchy. But if I cut it on the bias, meaning on the diagonal, then it's going to be nice and stretchy. And cutting your fabric on a true bias is the best way, which means a 45-degree angle. So to find your 45-degree angle, all you do is fold over one corner until it's lining up with the selvage, parallel to the selvage over here. And this creates an L shape up here to the selvage. And then that angle right there is your 45-degree. So then you can turn it and draw a line. And I like to just use my 2-inch ruler because I usually can get the perfect size welt between the 1/4-inch welt and a 2-inch piece of fabric, and it makes the perfect size seam allowance. So you draw a line, cut it out, and then you can see how nice and stretchy that is compared to where I cut it on the straight grain. And the reason that's important is because when you're sewing this around the corners of the pillows, it doesn't turn very nicely when it's straight, and when it's on the bias and you want to round the corners, it is more flexible. And it's going to make a nice corner. And also it's going to lay nicer on the pillow, even on the straight parts. So always, if you can, cut your welt on the bias. what I'm gonna do next is cut off this little piece of selvage, which is what I would do when I'm ready to sew these together. And the angle of this cut is perfect for me to have a diagonal seam. And you wanna put your welt together with a diagonal seam rather than a straight seam. So if I were to stitch this together and then open it, it's gonna have a huge bump because that seam is gonna be all in one place. So that's the reason why it's really important to put your welt pieces together on the diagonal. And then when you make your welt, which you'll see in a minute here, that seam gets distributed in different places around the actual welt. So it's not as bulky as if it was a straight seam. So the way you join these, if you were to just turn this over and sew your seam, your 1/2 inch seam right there, you're not gonna be lined up properly. So if that was my stitch and I opened it, you see how this line is not lined up with this edge of the fabric. So the proper way, you're still gonna turn it over and see how it makes this nice L. But what you need to do is move this over. Instead of having it right where the points line up, you wanna slide this over so that the points overlap each other. And then you're gonna sew, you're gonna connect where they intersect here and right here. So you're gonna draw an imaginary line, which I'll draw a real line right now, but usually I'm just drawing an imaginary line with my eyeballs, connecting those two ends. And then when you sew that line and then you open it, now your fabrics are perfectly even from this piece to this piece. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take this over to the sewing machine and sew that up right there. Okay, and I took the pins out because I'm just gonna hold it together with my hands. And I have my welt foot already on here, but that's okay. So I'm gonna start over here and then aim for this line over here, the intersection right there. And I'm gonna go over it once without back stitching, and then I'll go over it again with a back stitch. The first time is just to make sure I have a straight stitch. So now when I open this, you can see how even each edge is. And then you can cut that off, and then you can also cut down the seam allowance, which I recommend because it's gonna be really bulky if you leave it there. I'm always cutting down unnecessary fabric to avoid bulk, whether I'm making a welt or upholstering a cornice. So now when I get to that part under the sewing machine and I'm sewing this along, you can see how this diagonal seam is gonna wrap around and get transferred from one side to the other, and it's gonna make this part where it gets seen on the outside of the pillow a lot less bulky than if the seam was right on top of itself like that. That would make it a lot more bulky. So let's go ahead and make this piece of welt right here real quick, because then I want to show you how to join the ends on my little tiny pillow piece. So you're wrapping up that 1/4 inch piece of welt with this bias piece of velvet, and you're just lining up each edge, feeding it into the sewing machine. And then the welt foot, which is also a zipper foot, is just gonna ride up next to the welt and give you a nice even stitch on the other side. So just go through the whole piece of welt, and then we'll be ready to sew it onto the little pillow. I'm gonna start sewing this welt onto this little pillow just to show you how I am gonna join the ends once I get all the way around all 4 sides. And I'm gonna clip the corners how I would normally do it and pivot at each corner. Okay, one more corner and then I can join the ends. And this is my new trick that I want to show you more than anything. But all the other tips that I'm describing hopefully are gonna help also. So I have to leave a big enough gap to make this work, and I probably need to open up this part a little bit more even. What I'm trying to get is a nice diagonal seam where I'm gonna join these, rather than just overlapping them, which a lot of people do. So what I need to do is open up the welt and reveal that welt on the inside so that I can butt them up to each other and cut out the extra. And this is way too much, so I'm gonna cut some of this off so that I don't have too much in my way. I'm gonna open this up. You can use a seam ripper if you want. I'm just using my scissor. Careful not to cut your fabric. Now, I'm gonna tape up this end and then put some tape around this one. And then I can cut away the extra. So this is blue painter's tape, or you can use masking tape. And then put the tape on this one in the same general area. And then you wanna lay them so they're nice and relatively flat. And then just cut with the scissor right through where they're taped. That way each end will stay taped and won't get extra bulky on the inside. Keep the welt out of the way for the next part. So what we're gonna do is try to line up the edge of the welt right here with the edge of the pillow right here. And then we're gonna fold this over, just like when we were cutting our bias. You wanna have that 45-degree angle. And I'm gonna put a little pin right here to keep this flat. I'm gonna get up a little bit higher. There we go. Okay, so then I'm gonna fold that over, and this is where I'm gonna sew my diagonal line. So if you press that with your fingers and then open it, it kind of still shows you that line. So I'm gonna draw on that line with the pencil so you can see it, and then I can use that line when I'm sewing so I can see it. So keep that part folded down and then try to bring over the other side. And this is why we need a lot of extra room in between. So I'm gonna open this up even more. You just wanna leave more room than I did when you're making your pillow. With this part laying as flat as possible, right here, fold this one in the opposite direction, and those diagonal lines will meet up and intersect on each end, just like they did when you were making your diagonal seam when you made your welt. And then we can open up the top one, and so that we can kind of pin it together so we can get it under the sewing machine and make that seam. So I'm gonna pin the two layers together so that I can pick this up and get everything out of the way, and then bring it under the sewing machine foot right here. And I'm gonna stitch right on top of that pencil line right here. And hopefully I'm gonna have my seam right where I want it. See that? Nice diagonal bias, and then it looks like it fits the right amount of fabric underneath it. So I'm gonna go over it one more time just to lock the stitch in place, and then I can cut out the extra fabric. So now all of this is extra, so I'm gonna cut that off really close to the seam. And then I'm gonna try to open it, and you can take it back to the iron and press it with the iron carefully. And then all we have to do is trap this welt back on the inside and stitch it up. So I'm gonna try to do that over here, and then you can see my extra threads. Take those out, and you wanna make sure that your welt stays on top of the seam, and you keep that seam open on either side of the welt. And then this other one, you don't want that one to sneak out. I'm gonna check it one more time, and then I'm kind of forcing this velvet, pushing it with my finger to keep it from traveling, just like I did when I was sewing the welt onto the pillow in the first place. There, let's see how it looks. That looks pretty good for a little tiny pillow. I wasn't being too careful with keeping my welt on the edge of the pillow. Some of it is peeking over, and I definitely got way over on this side, but that's okay. What I'm really happy with is how my diagonal seam right here is laying really nice and flat, and that was just my first try. Sometimes I have to go over it again if I didn't get close enough the first time, but that looks beautiful. Look how cute these little pillows turned out. This is the sample that I wanted to show you how I put the welt seam together on the diagonal. So this is what I would say is the best way to join your welt, and this pillow is adorable. At first glance, you would not be able to know or see where the join is because it's so pretty. Okay, so then I made this other one. Here is the seam that is just a straight seam, which isn't bad. This is the join where this side is overlapping this side. So all the raw edges of this side tuck into and inside this part. That's why this side is so much thicker. So this might work with a thinner fabric, but on a thick fabric or a velvet like this, it's very obvious and not very pretty. And then over here is the diagonal seam again, which is beautiful. And then here is another way that I see a lot of pillows getting made, where the two ends just kind of overlap each other and the raw edges get tucked inside and they get stitched inside the pillow. It's not horrible, but it's just not as invisible as this one right here, especially when you look at them side by side. So I'm gonna just hang on to these and use them when I'm talking about Welt or showing a designer why they would want to have a professional make their pillows, because you're going to end up with a more custom finished pillow. And if you want to maybe go with somebody that hasn't been doing it as long, or that's more of a home sewer, you're going to end up with probably that or this. So practice your skills on joining your Welt and make up a couple of samples, and you can also talk about why your pillows are so beautiful. These are so cute.